Hello, Akira here, and welcome back to the channel. Today, as with the FE3 and Path of Radiance reviews before it, may I present a largely plot spoiler-free review of the 10th game in the series, Radiant Dawn. Before I start though, I would like to say a huge thank you to everyone who subscribed and made it so the channel has hit 1,000 subscribers. Radiant Dawn is the sequel to Path of Radiance, which is not a game that I enjoyed. In fact, I have been very vocal about my dislike of it. My opinion has softened a bit since then, but I'm still very glad that I made it. I got to hear about the experiences of fellow fans who didn't enjoy the game as much as it seems to be beloved by the Western Fire Emblem fanbase, and also some of the experiences of people who do like the game a lot. So thanks to everyone who watched it and shared their thoughts on the game. As a result of Radiant Dawn being a sequel, basic knowledge of the plot of Path of Radiance will be assumed and not spoiled beforehand. Any spoilers for Radiant Dawn proper will be preempted, with a timestamp that you can jump to in the description below for when it ends. Still, if even gameplay spoilers are too much for you, then I completely understand giving the video a miss. This video is based on a hard playthrough that was mostly blind, only searching up the locations of hidden items and asking for tips from people on voice call at a select few points in the story. Notably, I played with cleared save data, allowing me to play hard from the get-go, on the Iron Man friendly Lord Mewtwo patch, which re-enables enemy ranges, normally disabled on hard, and removes a lot of arbitrary game over conditions, which, well, has some interesting results at times. Before moving on to the gameplay details, since a common refrain in the Path of Radiance review was that I didn't give enough credit to plot, I'll first go into my thoughts on the story, which you can, of course, just skip using the timestamp below to jump to my thoughts on the gameplay. Despite some strange continuity moments, such as with the Black Knight, Radiant Dawn was clearly made as a direct sequel to Path of Radiance, unlike the moment of FE7 retroactively becoming a prequel to FE6. And I think that it works a lot better as further expansion on Tellius than FE7 does as an addition to Alib, which, if anything, I feel hurts the lore built in FE6. The idea of the split armies for narrative purposes is cool, if sometimes poorly implemented. Even just purely from a story pacing perspective, having 3 separate armies leads to the plot feeling bloated at times. I very much think that although Act 2 with Alencia's army is neat as a self-contained story, I do like Alencia as a character, it doesn't add anything to the overarching plot of the game itself. If we were to focus on a perspective other than Ike's or Micaiah's, I think it would have been much more interesting to focus on Sanaki's. Still, from a gameplay point of view, this means that there are some opportunities to transfer items and even units between the armies, which seems fun to play around with. Regarding Micaiah, I like her a lot as a character, between her ability of foresight, the need she feels to conceal her age, and also the ruthlessness she will display in what she thinks to be the best interests of Dayan. Speaking about Micaiah inevitably means having to talk about the Blood Pact. The Blood Pact I actually don't mind that much for 4 reasons. Firstly, Pelias seems like the kind of person who would unwittingly sign a document dooming his country's population, not least because he has been identified as an easy target by Uzuka and groomed for that exact purpose. Secondly, in a world where magic already exists and is a subject that Begnion has clearly been conducting extensive private research into, I don't see why something like the Blood Pact couldn't exist. Thirdly, being very private for a long time and vaguely unfamiliar with interacting with other people, Micaiah also seems like the kind of person who would follow Pelias' very seemingly nationalistic and violent anti-Laguz campaign before finding out about the pact, even if she doesn't personally agree with fighting. Lastly, it's good that our allied party isn't incredibly racist. Like, I don't love it. I do think it's a very contrived way of having Micaiah and Ike's armies fight, but I don't mind it that much. Conversely, Ike I felt was very forced throughout parts of the plot, especially at the end in the tower. I was very neutral on his character during Path of Radiance, finding him refreshing but not actually interesting, but well, I find Micaiah and Sanaki far more interesting than I find him. So if anything, the amount of emphasis put on to him at their expense has now actually made me dislike him slightly. Anyway, moving on from story thoughts, let's move on to what I think is the actually interesting part, the gameplay. Unlike my Path of Radiance review, I don't feel like I have to intentionally go digging for positive things to say about aspects of Radiant Dawn's gameplay, which is an encouraging sign. Radiant Dawn's mechanics are far more refined than their counterparts in Path of Radiance, which I believe to be for the better in most cases. Firstly, skills that are removed from a unit are now converted into skill scrolls, that can then freely be reassigned to any other unit should they have the capacity for it. This is a feature that I enjoy a lot, as it means that you can mix up your skill setups as best suit the map coming up, without needing some additional investment. It also allows for an easier movement of skills between the different armies if you know what's coming up. Even if you don't though, I didn't during my playthrough, it still allows for a lot more unit customization, and I enjoyed it greatly. Secondly, the Laguz meter now works differently. Everyone now starts with 0 gauge out of a full 30 needed to transform normally, and once it's filled, they do not instantly transform. Instead, they are able to transform as a command when it's convenient for either you or the AI, meaning that both parties are better able to leverage Laguz's utility and combat when it is most advantageous. In particular, this means that if you are on a map where there are initially non-hostile untransformed Laguz, the longer you wait, the more of them will be able to transform when you enter their range. Untransformed Laguz are also able to counter at one range, though not initiate attack themselves with their fists, which is funny and does help them build strike rank if nothing else. Similarly to Path of Radiance, there are ways of expediting the transformation process. The Laguz Stone remains, instantly transforming Laguz. Demi Band is replaced by a skill called Wild Heart. This allows Laguz to instantly half shift at 0 gauge, gaining the same times 1.5 stat bonus instead of the times 2 from standard shifting. An item added to this game is the Olivia Grass, which Laguz can use to fill up their Laguz gauge by 15 points. This item is much more commonplace than Laguz Stones are, and are therefore incredibly useful, as they allow the player to keep Laguz transformed for a much larger proportion of their fielded map time. Lastly, there is also a late game item that, when used, allows a Laguz to stay transformed for an entire map. One mechanic that I think has improved significantly from Path of Radiance is bonus experience. Here, the cost of BEXP per level is much steeper than it was in Path of Radiance, now following this formula. Especially since on hard mode, the BEXP cost is twice that of normal mode, it was present in far more limited supply than it was in my English hard mode playthrough of Path of Radiance, greatly limiting its power. Additionally, BEXP is now guaranteed to increase free, and only free, of the unit stats on level up. This is not a perfect implementation. Not all stats are created equal, and due to the fact that growths are typically not balanced evenly, and rather favour certain stats, especially if you're willing to save scum or it's easy to cap out some stats, then you can make it so that you get your desired stat growths. This was advice that I was given regarding some units, especially for core combat benchmark stats like strength or speed. Still, I feel this is a big improvement over Path of Radiance's system, as it both makes BEXP dumping someone to break the game immediately more difficult, and also means that should you use it on a training project with a high growth total, they very well may be quote-unquote losing stats that they would have gained if leveled in the traditional way. Lastly, it is also worth noting that forging, which I neglected to mention in my Path of Radiance review, has been upgraded so that you are no longer limited to only forging one weapon per map. Coin usage to increase some attribute of your weapon, I think it's really silly. It reminds me a lot of the shuffle time mechanic in Persona 3, and while it's not as egregious as said mechanic, I still don't like it. Still, while like in Path of Radiance, tome forges remain relatively expensive, overall I think this is an improvement, as it allows for wider forge distribution in a game where, for a long time, adequate gold budgeting is actually a consideration. Though they're still not good, the upgrade is also true of the animations, which are far better than the ones in Path of Radiance. In addition, Radiant Dawn also introduces new mechanics. One that I enjoyed is ledges. Traversing them costs free move for most foot units, 4 for armors, 1 for flyers, and cannot be traversed by cavalry at all. They provide a hit and avoid bonus to the unit on higher ground. Ledges also block off the one range for both parties. It makes sense. Having the height advantage has been important in many battles throughout history, and the existence of ledges also greatly affects the way that the player uses and positions their units, which I like. In hindsight, the lack of ledges in Micaiah's paralog in Fire Emblem Engage feels very different, since that game doesn't have a ledge mechanic, which I think is a shame as the original map plays very differently, and in my opinion, far better. Another mechanic new to Radiant Dawn is Tier 3 classes. These are a tier above the standard advanced class tier that comprises Fire Emblem staple classes such as Paladins, Snipers, etc., including corresponding classes of Gold/Silver Knight and Marksman. Given the length of the game, 45 chapters, this is very much required. It benefits the game structure, so I like it in this context, but I wouldn't like it dropped into any other Fire Emblem game randomly. Still, there are some cool moments such as Marksman having bow range +1 at a hit penalty, which is reminiscent of how Free House's Archer class and further upgrades have bow range skills with an increasing hit penalty for each square of distance beyond the bow standard of 2 tiles. Not a new mechanic per se, but something that I really like about Radiant Dawn compared to Path of Radiance and a fair few other Fire Emblem games is the enemy quality and class caps. While Radiant Dawn isn't a perfectly balanced game, far from it, as I'll soon expand on in a later section of the video. At the very least, for a good portion of the game, the units hit hard and have appreciable bulk. This means that you do actually have to think about how to approach enemy formations. Additionally, class caps do vaguely matter in Radiant Dawn. This is both due to the way that BEXP works with 3 guaranteed stats per level, and how some units are very likely to cap out certain stats, but also just applies to the game more broadly. There are definitely some losers here, magical units being the most egregious example, but overall it's a choice that I enjoy as a way to meaningfully differentiate classes and units from one another. Lastly, I'll talk a bit about my favourite part of the game, which is the part where you control the Dawn Brigade. I really like them. Comparatively, most of them are not good units, and I kind of like that. It means that you have to actually think about how to approach your various encounters and use clever positioning and body blocking to avoid suffering from success, or having a single unit get attacked by too many enemy units. Even your Jagan, Soph, who starts at tier 2 in a squad full of tier 1 units, isn't immortal and can't kill everything for free. While you'd have to overextend in all of this to happen, and it is unlikely, it is possible for him to die on the map directly after the one he joins on, and he isn't able to kill all enemy types in one round of combat without having his A support with Micaiah active, which gives them both a +2 attack bonus. And, well, with a base 15 HP, 2 defense, and 4 res, Micaiah is very much not a unit who you can place carelessly. So even with the relatively busted units that come to help the Dawn Brigade, you still have to think about how to best use them. Anyway, that's been a long section about the positives, so I don't think it's that surprising that there's going to be an also long one about the negatives, since it leads on from the Dawn Brigade point, who I very much enjoyed using. My leading point is that this game has some lows. Some map gimmicks in this game I found to be really grating. Literally, there is a map where, since the goal is to be accomplished by the green units, the map can play itself without any player action, and it takes forever due to the number of units present, even with map animations turned completely off. There are other examples as well, such as the Pitfall Bridge making a return, but somehow even worse than 3 years prior, which is impressive. I'll give it that, but I don't like it. Additionally, due to the split army nature of the game and the fact that the armies for the most part start out uncustomizable, you have this introductory moment several times. This breaks up the gameplay flow a lot, and I imagine means that quite a large proportion of maps could feel boring to play on repeat playthroughs. I mentioned before that I like the Dawn Brigade section of the game a lot. Shortly after completing the game, I decided to start placing all of the maps in the game on a personal rankings tier list for myself. So in order to maintain an element of plot spoiler freedom, here is a graph of the proportions of the maps from each army and how I rated them. As you can see, the Dawn Brigade I consider the most highly overall. Then the Grail Merc maps do relatively badly for me, which is a part that a lot of people seem to enjoy while not liking using the Dawn Brigade. Then part 4 performs particularly badly, to the point where I made a short about it, which I have talked to multiple FE content creator friends about, and all of them also agree that they dislike it. It wouldn't surprise me if most people who play this game heavily dislike at least one part of it. Moving on to the lesser cons. While the excellent base system from Path of Radiance remains, the support system is severely lacking in terms of all of unlocking them, how they progress, and how many are allowed to be active at any one point in time. How many can be active at any point in time, you ask? You are allowed to have one buddy who can augment both unit stats slightly while they're within 3 tiles of each other. Then there aren't even full-length support conversations. Instead, on map, you can have these 2-sentence-long conversations in the vein of engage C and B's bomb supports, which sometimes don't even make sense. At least Radiant Dawn does have base conversations in which various characters can give their opinions on the events of the plot for a bit of characterization. Still, if you're a character new to Radiant Dawn who isn't important to the plot proper, it's sad. And that's being said by someone who is really not a story person, so I can imagine it feeling insulting to someone who does like the various characters introduced in this game. Next, I can say with confidence that this game has by far the worst implementation of hidden items in the entire series. This is the case because they are absolutely everywhere, starting with the 4th map in the game and being present on the vast majority of maps going forward. Some of them are incredibly helpful, such as the game's sole movement staff, and while they have a higher chance to, the thief line isn't even guaranteed to be able to collect them if they stand on the correct tiles. They get a bonus, sure, but what helps to guarantee it is, of all things, biorhythm. It's wildly obnoxious. I already am not a fan of non-guaranteed pickup chances for hidden items, which only FE12 does regardless of class, but especially when they're on so many maps and some of the items are actually good, I can see why someone might feel like they should have a guide up the entire time. Fortunately, I played this game mostly on voice call, so people give me a heads up on any particularly helpful hidden items. To anyone who was there, thank you very much for your pointers. Still, this is not a luxury that everyone will have. Moving on, while I like the existence of the tier 3 classes, I do not like the tier 3 class skills. These are skills that units automatically learn upon promoting into tier 3 and have a stat divided by 2% chance to activate. Despite the profile picture, I don't like proc skills. However, what makes it even worse is that most of them do the same thing. Triple your damage output and have some other effect. AKA, they kill the enemy, and then if the enemy somehow survives, apply some additional effect. Frankly, they are neither well nor interestingly designed. Lastly, something very worth noting firmly under cons is baffling game design choices that I did not have to personally contend with. This is due to the setup of my playthrough, which was done with clear save data on the Lord Mewtwo Iron Man friendly patch. Firstly, I'm not a fan of the fact that in order to play hard mode, you need to have clear save data. Even if you want to play normal or easy mode for whatever valid reason, there's even some in-playthrough content that's locked behind having clear save data, which is so bizarre to me. This isn't a multi-route game with a golden ending, and the gameplay is still Fire Emblem at its core. Locking content behind a completed playthrough is entirely unnecessary. Perhaps most egregiously, the ability to turn off enemy animations entirely is also locked behind having clear save data. I found Path of Radiance slow. The only reason I could bring myself to play Radiant Dawn, despite its overall length, is because I knew that this was a setting that existed and that I could access. However, if I could not, and didn't feel some obligation to eventually play through all the games as an FE tuber, I'd probably put the game down sometime during part 1, maybe part 2, and never touched it again. Secondly, there are also some changes made when playing on hard mode. Some of these I don't mind, such as no longer having the weapon triangle and map affinity, where units, both allied and enemy, with the same affinity as the map get a small bonus. The one I do mind is the fact that on hard mode, you cannot see enemy attack ranges, so you have to manually count the tiles an enemy can move to and attack. In a sense, it does make the game harder, especially when terrain with variable movement cost gets involved, is an extra thing to keep track of in a strategy game, which is a form of difficulty. However, I would argue that this is a form of fake difficulty. It may mean that you misplace a unit and get punished for it, sure, but you get punished not for any tactical acumen, but for not being able to hold an additional piece of information in your head, in a game that's turn-based without a real-time aspect to it. There's no reason for it. Too long didn't watch this section. If you're going to play hard mode, get yourself a patch that re-enables enemy ranges. My last point isn't really an outright con, but is more a comment on unit balance. In this game, it's not really there in any serious fashion when comparing units to one another. Due to the multiple army nature of the game, past a certain point, you kind of end up going from juggernaut to juggernaut, with there being some units who are very clearly superior, with others being subpar in comparison. In particular, mages in this game are not great. They have low speed and bulk, in addition to units, both player and enemy, actually having res. This means you can end up with incredibly strange feeling situations if you played other games in the series, such as your own armors doubling and one-rounding enemy mages. This is exacerbated as healing utility is not particularly valued in many instances, as healing items have more uses and HP recovery than they do in other games. For instance, the Vulnerary is no longer the lowest tier of healing item, that now being the Herb, which heals 10 HP with up to 10 uses, compared to Vulneraries typically having 3. Then Radiant Dawn Vulneraries heal 20 HP and have 8 uses, with there being 6 use concoctions that heal 40 HP a pop. Don't get me wrong, staffing isn't useless, as it can allow you to have your combat units use their turn to attack rather than use a healing item. However, it undoubtedly contributes to Radiant Dawn magical units being relatively bad compared to other options. Unit balance is also rather unfairly distributed amongst the mounts. Cavalry are often hindered through things like the existence of ledges. In contrast, Wyverns especially are very strong, as they don't take effective damage from bows, which are pretty common among enemies in this game, instead taking effective damage only from less common Thunder Magic, which is also the low hit line of tomes. While this wasn't a concern for me in this first blind playthrough, this unit imbalance does mean that I can easily imagine a player feeling stifled in terms of the units they can feasibly use. Especially with how the EXP is now more limited, especially on hard mode where the key combat benchmarks are also higher, there seems to be some limit on how much you can meme around compared to many other Fire Emblem games. This is a sentiment that I've heard from various friends of mine who have played both hard and normal modes. So if I do another playthrough of Radiant Dawn in the future, it may be a playthrough done on normal mode so I can play around with some different units. For what it's worth, I do still think there is a lot of room to meme around in Radiant Dawn hard mode. It's part and parcel of the RNG based nature of Fire Emblem. Additionally, skills can be passed around much more freely compared to Path of Radiance due to the mechanical updates in the system. So I don't want anyone to come away from this review thinking that they have to play Radiant Dawn hard mode in a prescriptive fashion without having fun with it. I certainly enjoyed my playthrough. Anyway, it is finally time to move on to the verdict. Despite the very, very long section on the gameplay negatives, I would like to reiterate that there are also a great number of good things about the second game in the Tellius duology. Many mechanics are improved upon from Path of Radiance, the new mechanics add additional tactical depth to the game, and while unit balance is not there on a macro scale, you do still have to think about how you use them in the moment. So I both like it a lot more than its predecessor, and would actually say that I like Radiant Dawn, and that my overall opinion on Tellius has improved. I would recommend Radiant Dawn to people who played Path of Radiance and found its gameplay lacking, really love the setting of Tellius and want to know what happens to the characters after the end of Path of Radiance, and /or people who don't want to play Path of Radiance but have read a plot summary thereof, and who want to play a very different feeling Fire Emblem game that does have its moments of challenge. Still, it is a long game by Fire Emblem standards, and does require at least a basic understanding of Path of Radiance's story, so if you want a short, snappy game, this may not be the Fire Emblem game for you. Oh, also, if you're going to play on hard mode, or are similarly impatient to me, I cannot overstate how much I would recommend getting a clear save data file so you can turn off animations entirely, and the Lord Mewtwo patch that re-enables enemy ranges on hard mode. Anyway, though I do like it, Radiant Dawn simply has so many low points, in addition to its high points, that for me, it has to go into the some enjoyment, some great pain tier of my personal Fire Emblem tier list. Thanks for watching this review, not least because that was a lot, which is fitting. As a sequel, and even just as a standalone game in its own right, Radiant Dawn is a beast. If you've watched this far, I'm guessing that you enjoyed it, so if you did, I would very much appreciate you letting me know, whether it be through liking or commenting on the video, or subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. I'd love to know what you think about Radiant Dawn, especially if you feel that there's anything positive or negative that you think I haven't mentioned. You can let me know in the comments or in the community Discord, which is linked in the description. It will also let you keep up to date better with my future projects, and is a place where you can interact with other people about Fire Emblem. But of course, there is no pressure or expectation to do any of the above. Anyway, thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you again next time. Until then, have a good one.